All right, folks, it's time to bring on FDD's Benham Ben Taleblu. Few will follow the protests more closely, and few will follow the regime's response the way that he has. So let's do this. Let's bring the notorious BBT onto the show. Welcome to the program, Benham Ben Taleblu.
Greetings, John. Good to be back with you.
Greetings. I know you're busy, so thank you for joining us. So let's start with this. Where are we now? Let's do this by the numbers, the deaths, the arrests, the injuries, the number of people out on the streets. What can we say just from a facts and figures standpoint about what we're watching right now in Iran?
Sure. So this is perhaps the most important battle in the past 46 years of the Islamic Republic for power from the street against the state. I got to tell you, I've been watching this for a while now. Over the past 8 years, you've seen the pattern of anti-regime protests go from seeking reform to wholesale revolution. This one right now is the most significant one, more than 2009, more than 2022. Now the numbers into it. We are into the third week of this most significant uprising from the street against the state. What that has meant is 500 plus, as you reported before, killed. That can be confirmed independently by Iranian human rights NGOs out here in the West. However, based on things internally, dribs and drabs of people's, particularly medical staff, hospital staff, nurses from all across Iran, that number is roughly looking like 2 to 3K, unfortunately, and growing. And the vast majority of that number killed, the 2 to 3K, the 2 to 3,000, are believed to have been killed under the 4+ day internet outage. So this is looking like a much more faster, much more bloodier repeat of the crackdown of 2019. When you had a near week-long internet outage and 1,500 were killed.
Yeah, and we're hearing right now that or at least according to the trackers over there, something like 90 hours straight of no internet and phone. That even some of the internal communications within Iran, not just the outside lines, but the inside lines are also knocked out. But all right, so you mentioned 2009. You mentioned 2022. So let's talk about those previous waves of protests and what makes this one different, why we're feeling maybe a little bit more sanguine about what's happening, or are you feeling sanguine about what's happening?
Well, it's always a shot of optimism when the Iranian people show the world how brave they are, but then it's always a shot of reality, and I don't even want to say pessimism, when you see how armed and lethal the regime is and how much hemming and hawing we see from friends here in the West who purport to stand with every other cause in the world, particularly on campuses, but never really meaningfully put their money where their mouth is when it comes to standing with the most pro-American and the most pro-Israeli population in the heart of the Muslim world. But beyond that really tough situation, I will tell you this. Protests are not new in Iran, but over the past, I would say, again, 8 years, there was a critical juncture in how the Iranian people were articulating for political change in their country. Rather than work through a highly rigged, highly contested ballot box, they started to take to the street in drastically different ways. So basically using economic issues, environmental issues, social issues to vent a larger political grievance. This was a fundamentally new formula, and it was happening just at the time that the West was being done with the idea of regime change. They were taking to the street to get into the regime change business. They weren't trying to change the exchange rate. They have been trying to change the regime. And what you've seen is a steady correlation of less electoral participation and more protest participation. And the defining feature of these protests is that they're more demographically and geographically diverse, and then also that they're fundamentally much more nationalist in tone and tenor. That's why the calls for the crown prince to return, or all of the harking back to his grandfather, have been a straight line from 2017 to 2026. So the more these things go on, the more nationalist they get, the more sharper of a divide the nationalist street is creating with the Islamist state. So that's something to keep in note. But for folks here who live and work in the West and policymakers, why is this different? Is it comes across the backdrop of 2025, the economic and environmental failures that were so magnified, so in front of everyone's face in 2025. And how can we forget this torpedoes all the theses that we've heard from experts, so-called experts who live and work here in Washington with us, John, that said that this would cause a rally around the flag, the 12-day war. Literally 6 months after that conflict, not only has the Ayatollah been shown to have no clothes, and this kind of gave a boost or a shot in the arm of Iranian protesters and dissidents, but rather you could say that they not only not rallied, they took to burning regime flags. So there's more targeting of regime symbols than ever before. And for those who said, well, just because the protesters are unarmed, they will be violently repressed and forever they will stay home. And that violent repression we saw on live TV during the women life freedom movements, this just goes to show you the regime can clobber people, can kill people, can frighten people, can deter people. But the resiliency of the Iranian protest movement is what makes this different. So timing, context, resiliency, a lot more of the same, the nationalism, and then the X factor here right now could even be the US. Never has a US president chosen to reach in and engage and make this their issue like Donald Trump has right now.
Yeah, and I gotta tell you, that rally around the flag theory, my heart goes out today to people like Trita Parsi and Barbara Slavin and Rob Malley and all these so-called experts on Iran who I think have been proven wrong time and again. And I gotta tell you, I do not shed a tear for whatever whatever they're going through right now. Um, Talk to us a little bit about the communication challenges, right? We've got no internet, no phones. We got intermittent Starlink connections. This is, of course, Elon Musk's tech. And I understand that he's talking to Donald Trump about trying to make sure that it can't be circumvented. But I'm also hearing that the regime is jamming it in some way. So, I mean, just give us a sense of how difficult it is to get these images that are showing up occasionally on our screen. It's far bigger than what we are seeing right now, right? I mean, there's a war going on the streets of Iran, and we're only getting little drips and drabs, right?
Absolutely. And sometimes a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes 1,000 words is worth a million pictures. One of the most horrifying non-images I can't get out of my head is looking at text, Telegram, and social media, just print messages from Iranians saying that they would wake up during this 4 day, thus far, and growing internet outage, internet blackout, and see you could basically say regime entities power washing blood off of the streets, given the crackdown from the night before. And so just average Iranians talking about seeing blood being power washed off of the street and seeing that in print so many times. I'm glad that I don't see images of that, but in so many ways, I wish the world would see images of that, because perhaps the world would then wake up and see that it's not just for the Washington Post democracy that dies in the darkness, it's Iranians that have been dying in the darkness. And
Hmm.
unfortunately, we've seen this movie before. We had an event at FDD after 2019. We've been working on this stuff on the Hill for quite a while about how to get secure communications, satellite communications, direct to cell technology. And I got to tell you that if this is all that the U.S. is going to do while the bullets are flying, that is too little, too late. Secure communications and satellite stuff is what you do before the protests start. But once the regime starts turning the guns on the protesters, and in this way, that is necessary, but that is nowhere near sufficient.
No, it's not. And we'll talk about Trump in a second, the role that he might be able to play. But for now, let me just ask you about the role of the crown prince. This is the son of the deposed Shah of Iran. He's been based in the United States. He's playing a role right now. Is he a difference maker? I mean, I got to tell you, I'm torn about this. The idea of advocating for a monarchy. People will say, why are we doing that when the people of Iran are they're democratic in nature? They appreciate democracy. Are we sending the wrong message here when we're trying to say that the people of Iran, that they're looking to create a different kind of regime than what they've had in the past? So are we muddying the waters here? But then again, this guy represents the kind of national pride of Iran, right? And true alternative to the regime. So how do we assess what's going on here with what folks are calling the crown prince?
Well, no doubt, as the Islamic Republic stock has plummeted, the Crown Prince's stock has skyrocketed. And it's no accident that as the Iranian society moves away from reform and embraces wholesale revolution, they push past Islamism and they re-embrace wholesale nationalism. So these are trend lines within Iranian society that have made him today, 46, 47 years after the 1979 revolution, I would say more popular across the very diverse, different mosaic that is Iran geographically, socioeconomically, and even ethnically than I would say ever before. What I would just say about the monarchy bit and his role that he's actually been talking about much more recently is that A, monarchies can be democratic. Some of the best US partners in the world are democratic monarchies, be it Japan or the United Kingdom, for example. We have lots of monarchies that have this kind of soft paternalism in the region that actually, compared to the violence in the region, actually look like bastions of stability. But I would say that that is not even what he's auditioning for. What he's auditioning for is to be a transitory nationalist figure that helps get you to a post-Islamic Republic future where the population can decide between republic and monarchy. And the whole goal here is to get the ballot box to mean something, get voting to mean something in Iran, so Iranians can finally be in charge of their own destiny. And if they want a monarchy, great. If they want a republic, great. But should we be robbing ourselves of options? Should we continue to make ourselves here in the West policymakers interested, again, in flipping the script on the Ayatollahs? Should we continue to make the perfect the enemy of the good? Absolutely not. And I got to tell you, having seen the Crown Prince from up close sometimes, and again, last year with Cliff May, FDD president, he was hosted at FDD to talk about this idea that both FDD and Mufti, many on the Hill, many in Europe, and even within the Iranian diaspora have grasped onto, which is called maximum support. I think it was a pretty popular event, and I think if Washington can actually find a moderate liberal figure with nationalist inclinations that can help get us to a post-Islamic Republic future, I would say all the better. Now, I'd also just foot stomp his critical role in these protests because while many have doubted the scale and the scope of his support in Iran, one major reason why the internet was actually cut so soon and at the timing that it was cut is that the first day the Crown Prince, I think it was last Thursday, called for a mass outpouring, you got the mass of the mass of the mass outpouring. You began this interview by talking about numbers. We are past the point of counting the turnout because the sheer volume created by the Crown Prince's first call last Thursday to come out spooked the Islamic Republic such that the reason now they have the internet blackout is one, to prevent Iranians from communicating with each other, two, to prevent the external opposition, and in particular the Crown Prince's folks, in being able to direct things because there isn't an individual leader or organizer on the ground. So to cut the ties between the external opposition and diaspora and internal protesters. And three, to avoid running afoul of Donald Trump's red line and getting those images of those blood-soaked streets out there into the Western press. So that is against this context why the regime has again turned to an internet blackout.
All right, more on Trump in a minute. I want to talk about the role of the international community. I mean, we've already talked about how the media is not covering this. We already have talked about how the campus protesters don't seem to be protesting. There doesn't seem to be enough, if you ask me anyway, enough pressure on the regime. But are we seeing more international isolation for the regime right now? I mean, we've seen the isolated reports of aircraft that are not flying to Iran right now for fear of, the instability there. That doesn't seem to me to be enough. What are you seeing right now?
Certainly, you're right. It doesn't seem to be enough. There are murmurings within the diaspora of some of those, international airlines slowly being brought back, where the regime may look to, replicate what it did in January 2020, where if there's a conflict, it might even target a civilian airliner, say it's an accident, use that to de-escalate and get attention off of itself. But that's really right now more in the world of rumors than actual intelligence. What I would like to see is more people foot stomping what Hannah Newman in the European Parliament did, which is to say, calling for the designation of the IRGC, do things abroad that can put wind beneath the wings of Iranian protesters, do things abroad that she's been saying, for example, that would mean recalling ambassadors from Iran, that would mean trimming the diplomatic missions and embassies and consulates and cultural centers that the Islamic Republic has all around the world, and making their ambassadors be expelled from these countries. Diplomatically, there's a lot of options here to get the G7 to say something, to get NATO to say something, to push the Islamic Republic at all international fora. Diplomacy doesn't have to just mean succumbing to your weaker adversary. Diplomacy can mean doing a full court press, making your adversary feel the heat without having to fire a single bullet. Donald Trump is the master of the bully pulpit. That kind of political and rhetorical talent that he's turned on domestic adversaries could so easily be turned on Iran's octogenarian supreme leader, so-called supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And I think the Iranian people would rally behind that. I mean, right now, where you have Iranians creating stickers with Trump's name on it, renaming streets with Trump's name on it, speaking in English in some of these protester videos, trying to get Trump's attention. I think the diplomatic and the political options are the easiest and among the most impactful to put wind beneath the wings of protesters. And I don't really see a lot of Western leaders doing it. I would love to see more from the Five Eyes countries. I would love to see more from countries that have significant Iranian diasporas. We've seen so many protests in Canada, in Australia, in the UK, in Paris, in France, in Germany, with the pre-1979 flags. I would love these leaders to actually be able to do something about it rather than hem and haw and again talk about Palestine.
Yeah, and there, we see the Israelis out front, and no surprise why. I mean, for them, the downfall of this regime is an existential matter for them, and so watching them message to the people of Iran directly. I've seen the sporadic Israeli flag on the streets, which is remarkable in and of itself.
Yeah.
But their role is not enough, and quite frankly, I mean, I don't think it's important to see it there. What we really want to see is more members of Congress coming out, members of Parliament in the EU. We want to see that groundswell of support, and it's not happened yet. But let me drill down a little bit for a second.
One footnote, I just want to say I was very pleased to see a tweet by AOC about this. I hope things are beginning to change. I really do hope things are beginning to change. But let's hope, but let's also push.
Yeah, I saw that tweet too, and my tweet to her tweet was someone's hedging. I think sometimes after you've taken the wrong position, you begin to see that you're on the wrong side of history. Maybe you want to put something out there that shows that, well, okay, maybe I was wrong, or maybe I'm beginning to shift because you see where things are going. You can read the writing on the wall. I'm not impressed with that, but I think it is worth noting. And look, if she gets on board, great. But she's done a lot of damage by supporting a lot of Iran's proxies over the years, not to mention Iran itself tacitly. Let's talk about Donald Trump. All right. He talked about how he had strong options. I think that was a direct quote as it relates to Iran. We were seeing reports yesterday out of Israel that there were aircraft on the way to the region, potentially to strike at the regime. This seems to be what at least some of the governments of the Middle East are talking about. But now we're hearing something a little different, that Donald Trump may be willing to engage in negotiations with the regime. Haven't we been there and done this? And don't we know what happens when you negotiate with the regime? Are you concerned?
I am significantly concerned. I mean, I'm concerned for several reasons. One, of course, is that the president's statement about wanting to hold the regime accountable if they cross this red line, if they crack down, in his words, quote, as is their custom. He's re-upped that threat several times, and each time he's re-upped that threat, it's been, again, a wind beneath the wings of Iranian protesters. The president has rightly been able to torpedo the thesis that, oh, if you give rhetorical support to protesters, it's the kiss of death. No such thing. We shouldn't have to worry about vindicating or falling into a trap set by the regime's narratives. But on the flip side, the more he says it and the more he creates the expectation and the more nothing happens, then the more the regime can actually swoop in and say, aha, there is no one to stand behind you. And then should there really be no meaningful practical support, that was when it would be when the heaviest of the heavy crackdown comes. So I think we're about to, one, enter the spiral or enter the cycle of diminishing returns for continuing to talk about it in this way by the president and then not actually begin to act. All eyes will be on a major national security meeting with the president and his cabinet tomorrow about this, where they will discuss options. I mean, I do think the president really does have in his parlance all the cards here, but to bail out a regime, to really want to negotiate with a regime who, by the way, you've proven you can achieve your national security aims without having to negotiate, because the president really took out the crown jewel of their nuclear program. So my question is, what is the regime going to be negotiating with you about, sir? What is there left to negotiate over? In a time when they don't control their own airspace, when they don't control their own streets, why would you want to throw this regime, and particularly this man, Ali Khamenei, a lifeline, when the signature element of Donald Trump's Iran policy has been to draw a sharp contrast with his Democratic predecessors, particularly President Obama? Obama had the Iran deal, Donald Trump left the Iran deal. Obama turned his back on Green Movement protesters, and Donald Trump actually stood with Iranian protesters 2017 to 2020. Why would he want to replicate the mistake of reaching out and speaking with, the Islamic Republic of Iran as the Islamic Republic is cracking down? That would seem to me to be falling actually into the political trap that he has sought to avoid for so long, which is to draw a comparison rather than draw a sharp contrast. with the policies of his Democratic predecessors. So for political reasons alone, I would hope that this is just a head nod. I would hope that this is just the president saying, look how desperate the regime is, that they need to talk to me. And I would hope that he actually does follow through on meaningful support. He's got a lot of options here, particularly on the cyber side. When we talk about standing with the street against the state, people immediately think kinetic. But had oil sanctions been vigorously enforced, this repression apparatus would not have had the money to stand on to keep funding these security forces. If there was a significant cyber campaign potentially from the Israelis and the Americans against the regime, they could try to blind the Basij or the law enforcement forces. Imagine real-time drone footage of armored personnel carriers being moved towards crowds and those armored personnel carriers being taken out selectively. I mean, the US has tons of options here. It's all about risk tolerance. It's all about politics. It's all about interest. And it's all about a theory of victory. And Donald Trump has to see, we can't connect these dots for him, but he has to see that a regime which has quite literally put a bounty on his head, which has issued several fatwas after the 12-day war, is not going to be interested in making a meaningful deal with you, sir. If they extend their hand right now, that's because they want the American imprimatur on when they crack down next on the most pro-American population in the Middle East.
Very well put. And I would just say that as we watch, Trump's maneuvers in Venezuela and the ousting of Maduro, and we see his rhetoric as it relates to peaceful places like Greenland, the idea that we're going to negotiate with this regime after everything that it's done and the threats to him personally, not to mention, assassination plots and the like, it would be very surprising to see him continue to talk. We're going to leave it there, though. BBT, thank you for joining us today on the FDD
Thanks for having me.